The sun hung like a bruised eye in the bruised sky over the desolate plains of the Texas frontier, casting long, hungry shadows that seemed to swallow the very light. It was a place where life was a desperate gamble against the elements, against unseen threats, against the quickening pulse of fear itself. It was here, amidst the whispering grass and the deceptive shimmer of heat, that a woman named Ilara found herself staring into the maw of something far more terrifying than any storm. A shifting, treacherous pool of quicksand, holding fast a young life. His cries, thin and reedy, were like the lament of the wind, carrying the weight of a world teetering on the precipice of conflict. She saw the feather in his hair, the painted skin, the desperate plea in his eyes, and knew instantly the impossible stakes. This was not merely a boy trapped, but a son of a chief, a future leader of the Comanche, a people whose very name sent shivers down the spines of the settlers. The very air seemed to thicken with the unspoken implications of her choice. To act was to risk everything she knew, to invite the unknown, to challenge the brittle peace of the land. To do nothing was to condemn a child, an act that would surely haunt her waking hours and infuse her dreams with the echo of his fading breath. A decision, stark and immediate, was demanded of her. A decision that would unravel the delicate threads of her existence and weave them into a destiny she could never have foreseen. This desolate landscape, often a canvas for despair, was about to become the crucible where humanity's most complex choices were forged, where a single act of impossible mercy could spark a chain reaction of profound and unpredictable consequences. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And subscribe if you want more content like this one. The mud sucked at the boy's legs with the insistent greed of a dying hunger, his chest rising and falling in ragged, desperate gasps. Ilara, a woman hardened by years of solitary survival and a past she meticulously kept buried beneath layers of stoicism, felt a primal, unwelcome flicker within her own breast. It was a raw, unbidden empathy, a dangerous weakness in a world that rewarded only strength. She moved with a calculated caution, each step a careful negotiation with the treacherous earth. Her eyes fixed on the boy's contorted face. His dark eyes, wide with a terror that transcended language, met hers. In that shared gaze, a fleeting, profound connection formed, a silent plea that bypassed the chasms of culture and animosity that separated their worlds. She extended a gnarled branch, thicker than her arm, pushing it through the viscous mud until it met his outstretched hand. The strain was immense, the mud's pull an invisible, powerful adversary that threatened to drag them both into its cold embrace. Sweat beaded on her brow, her muscles screaming in protest, but she held fast, her jaw set, her gaze unwavering. She was not a woman given to heroics, her life having taught her to trust only herself, to expect nothing but betrayal from the world. Yet, here she was, defying her own cynical creed, pulling against the very forces of nature and the ingrained prejudices of her time. The boy, small and slender, fought with a surprising ferocity, his small hands clutching the branch as if it were the last tether to life itself. Slowly, agonizingly, inch by agonizing inch, he began to rise from the sucking grip, the mud releasing its hold with a reluctant, slimy sigh. He was free, but the shadows of the encounter clung to him, and to her, a promise of things yet to unfold. He lay on the parched earth, gasping, mud-streaked and shivering, a creature newly birthed from the jaws of oblivion. Ilara knelt beside him, her own breath ragged, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins like a wild river. She observed him, not with pity, but with a detached curiosity that was her usual shield. He was young, perhaps 10 or 11, his face etched with a maturity beyond his years, a testament to the harsh realities of his existence. He was a son of the land, a child of the wild, and she, a transplanted woman, felt a strange, inexplicable kinship with his raw vulnerability. She offered him water from her canteen, a gesture simple yet profound, bridging the vast chasm between them. He drank, his throat working convulsively, his eyes never leaving hers, a deep, unsettling intensity in their depths. There was no gratitude explicitly expressed, no words exchanged, only a silent acknowledgement that passed between two beings who had faced death together. She cleaned his wounds, small scrapes from the struggle, with a practiced hand, her movements economical, devoid of unnecessary tenderness. The silence between them was heavy, pregnant with the unspoken, a testament to the historical weight that hung between their peoples. She knew what the other settlers would say, the whispers that would follow her, the accusations of treachery, the fear-driven condemnations. They saw only the other, the savage, never the boy, never the shared humanity. Her own past, steeped in difficult choices and moral compromises, made her acutely aware of the perilous line she had just crossed. She was an outsider even among her own, a woman who carried the burden of past failures like stones in her pockets. This act, born of an instinct she barely understood, had now further isolated her, placing her squarely in the perilous intersection of two warring worlds. The boy, for his part, simply watched, a silent sentinel, his gaze a mirror reflecting the unsettling truth of her solitary existence. The boy vanished as silently as he had appeared, a shadow melting into the vast, indifferent landscape. Alara watched him go, a strange hollowness settling in her chest. The silence that followed was not empty, but rather filled with the lingering echoes of the dramatic encounter, the frantic struggle against the quicksand, the boy's wide, terrified eyes, the profound, unarticulated bond that had formed between them in the face of death. 3 days. That was the unspoken deadline, the insidious timer that began ticking the moment he disappeared over the horizon. 3 days for the whispers to solidify into shouts, for the fear in the nearby settlement to curdle into resentment. She knew the pattern, had seen it unfold countless times in this unforgiving land. The settlers, their faces etched with the perpetual anxiety of the frontier, would soon accuse her of foolishness, of treason. You helped one of them, their eyes would scream, even if their lips remained sealed. Her isolated cabin, usually a sanctuary of quiet solitude, began to feel like a cage, its walls closing in, the vast plains outside transformed into a breeding ground for phantoms. Every rustle of leaves, every distant howl of a coyote, sent a jolt of apprehension through her. She was a woman who had learned to distrust every shadow, to anticipate every betrayal. Her life had been a series of calculated retreats, a desperate attempt to outrun the ghosts of her own making. Now, those ghosts seemed to be catching up, spurred on by an act of unexpected compassion. She found herself watching the horizon with a morbid fascination, half dreading, half anticipating the return. Would it be a war party, seeking revenge for perceived slights, or perhaps a formal demand for her surrender? The uncertainty was a corrosive acid, eating away at her hard-won composure. This was the wild, a place where debts were rarely forgotten, and mercy, a rare currency, often came with an unforeseen price. The years had etched lines of cynicism around Alara's eyes, deep furrows that spoke of betrayals and self-imposed exiles. Her hands, calloused and strong, bore the marks of a life spent in the unforgiving embrace of the land. But they also hinted at a more delicate past, a life she had deliberately abandoned. It was a choice born of desperation, a flight from a love that had become a gilded cage, and a family name that had suffocated her with its expectations. She remembered the grand house, the suffocating politeness, the rigid social codes that had felt more constricting than any quicksand. Her younger sister, fragile and sweet, a stark contrast to Alara's own rebellious spirit, had been the one truly cherished, the one deemed worthy of the family's legacy. Alara, always the outlier, the one who questioned, the one who chafed against the confines, had made a decision, cold and calculated, that had shattered their world. She had chosen a path of self-preservation over familial duty, escaping the perceived hypocrisy of their privileged existence, leaving behind the hushed whispers and judgmental stares. The memory of her father's stoic disappointment, her mother's tearful pleas, still pricked at the edges of her consciousness, a constant, dull ache. She had sought a raw, untamed freedom on the frontier, hoping to outrun the echoes of her past. But the desolation of the plains had only served to amplify them. Her life now was a testament to her flaws, the unyielding pride, the fierce independence that bordered on isolation, the deeply ingrained distrust of others. She had built walls so high, so thick, that even she struggled to glimpse the person she once was. Yet, the act of saving the boy had chipped away at a corner of those formidable defenses, allowing a sliver of forgotten humanity to peek through, a dangerous vulnerability she had long suppressed. It was an irony she keenly felt. She had fled one kind of trap only to build another, solitary and self-made. The news, like a virulent fever, spread through the small, dusty settlement with alarming speed. Whispers mutated into open speculation, then into outright condemnation. Elara's name, once merely a distant murmur associated with her isolated dwelling, became a focal point for the collective anxieties of the community. She helped a Comanche, the men muttered over their watered-down whiskey, their voices thick with a fear born of historical animosity and recent raids. A savage. Who knows what she told him? What she promised? The women, their faces drawn with the perpetual worry of frontier life, avoided her gaze. Their children pulled close, as if her presence was a contagion. They saw not the desperate act of saving a life, but a dangerous precedent, a crack in the fragile wall separating their world from the unknown. Their fears were legitimate, rooted in a brutal reality, but their collective response was a stereotypical manifestation of human prejudice, a primal need to identify and ostracize the other, to scapegoat the one who deviated from the norm. Elara felt their stares like physical blows, the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. She walked through the single street of the settlement with a defiant slump to her shoulders, her gaze fixed straight ahead, refusing to meet their accusing eyes. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She had long been an outcast, but now she was actively shunned, viewed as a potential traitor. The wilderness, once her haven, now felt like a vast, empty stage for an impending tragedy. The air grew thick with a palpable tension, a sense of dread that permeated every interaction, every silent glance. It was the calm before the storm, the unnerving stillness before the inevitable clash. Every day that passed without a sign of the tribe only amplified the fear, turning it into a monstrous, shapeless entity that preyed on their minds, feeding on their collective anxieties and suspicions. The horizon, once a symbol of endless possibility, now seemed to stretch into an ominous void, waiting to reveal its terrible secret. The sun dipped below the jagged horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and bruised purple, a vivid backdrop for the dawning terror. A low rumble, faint at first, then growing steadily, vibrated through the earth, a sound that spoke of countless hooves pounding the dry ground. It was the drumbeat of an impending storm, a sound that etched itself into the very bones of those who heard it. Elara stood outside her cabin, a solitary figure against the vast, darkening expanse, her heart a frantic bird trapped in her ribs. She saw them then, a dark, undulating line emerging from the shimmering distance, growing in size with terrifying speed. A sea of riders, horses, and painted warriors, their silhouettes stark against the dying light. It was the entire tribe, just as the title had foretold, a colossal, awe-inspiring display of power and numbers that dwarfed the small settlement. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm her, but years of hardship had forged within her an unyielding core. She had faced death before, had stared it down in various forms, and she would do so again. Her eyes instinctively sought a familiar, smaller figure among the sea of formidable warriors. And there he was, the boy, riding alongside a tall, imposing man, clearly the chief. He looked different, transformed by the context of his people, less vulnerable, more a part of the formidable whole. The air crackled with an almost unbearable tension, thick with the scent of dust and fear. The settlers, having rushed from their homes, now huddled together, a pathetic, terrified cluster, their faces ashen in the fading light. Their whispers had died, replaced by a horrified silence, their earlier bravado replaced by an overwhelming sense of helplessness. This was not merely a band of warriors. This was a force, an undeniable presence that commanded respect and instilled terror. The enormity of her single act of mercy now loomed before her, magnified 1,000-fold, its consequences about to unfold in a way she could never have possibly imagined. The line separating two worlds was about to be irrevocably crossed. The Comanche halted, a silent, imposing wall of muscle and painted hide, their horses snorting and stamping, their eyes fixed on the huddled settlers. The chief, a man of formidable presence, dismounted with a fluid grace that belied his powerful build. His gaze, piercing and unwavering, swept over the frightened faces of the settlers, then settled, with an unnerving intensity, on Ilara. It was a gaze that seemed to strip away her defenses, to see into the very core of her being. The boy, who she now recognized as the chief's son, stood silently beside his father, his eyes, still holding that profound intensity, meeting hers. The silence stretched, taut and agonizing, each second pregnant with unspoken meaning. It was a standoff, a moment suspended between peace and violence, between understanding and utter destruction. One of the settlers, a burly man named Jebediah, known for his bluster and his virulent hatred of the Comanche, took a hesitant step forward, his voice a hoarse whisper. "What do you want?" he croaked. His bravado utterly evaporated in the face of such overwhelming power. The chief did not reply, his gaze remaining fixed on Ilara. It was a deliberate, calculated silence, a powerful display of his authority, and a profound misunderstanding for the settlers who expected immediate aggression. The air throbbed with the unspoken tension, the fear of misinterpreting a gesture, a glance, a shift in weight. Ilara felt the weight of their expectations, the silent pleas for her to act, to explain, to somehow avert the impending disaster. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that her life, and perhaps the lives of everyone in the settlement, hung precariously in the balance of this fragile, dangerous moment. The boy's silent presence, a bridge between two worlds, was the only thing that offered a sliver of hope in the suffocating darkness of the confrontation. The chief's piercing gaze seemed to ask a question that had no words, a profound challenge to her character. The chief finally broke the agonizing silence, his voice deep and resonant, each word carefully articulated in a broken yet understandable English. "My son," he began, his hand resting briefly on the boy's shoulder. He spoke of a woman who pulled him from the earth's hungry maw. His gaze locked with Ilara's once more, a profound question in their depths. "We came, we sought, we did not know if this was a trick, a betrayal." A subtle tremor ran through the huddled settlers, their eyes wide with disbelief and a dawning understanding. This was not the expected war party. This was something far more complex, far more disquieting. The chief continued, his voice imbued with a quiet dignity. "A life given back. This is a debt that must be honored." He gestured to the tribal members behind him, and from within their ranks, two warriors stepped forward, bearing bundles wrapped in tanned hides. They laid them gently on the ground, then unwrapped them to reveal intricately crafted furs, smoked meats, and precious, shimmering beads, offerings of immense value. The chief looked at Ilara, his eyes unwavering. "Our gratitude. For the life you returned to us. For the future you saved." The raw emotion of the moment hung heavy in the air, a profound contrast to the years of fear and animosity that had defined their interactions. Ilara felt a wave of shock, then a profound, unexpected relief wash over her. It was a different kind of war, a battle of expectations overturned, of stereotypes shattered. The settlers, their faces a mix of confusion and awe, struggled to comprehend the scene unfolding before them. The boy, the chief's son, finally spoke, his young voice clear and resonant, cutting through the stunned silence. "She showed me no fear, only strong will." His simple words, devoid of pretense, were the emotional climax, a stark validation of Ilara's solitary, complicated act of mercy. It was an affirmation not just for her, but for the possibility of a different future, a fragile bridge built on an act of impossible kindness. The Comanche departed as silently as they had arrived, leaving behind not destruction, but a scattering of precious gifts and an unsettling quiet. The dust from their departure settled, leaving the air strangely clear, imbued with a new kind of meaning. Ilara stood amidst the bewildered settlers, the silence around her thick with unspoken questions, with the residue of shattered prejudices. The offerings lay on the ground, tangible proof of an unimaginable exchange, a stark testament to the profound debt the chief felt. The settlers, their initial terror slowly giving way to a grudging respect, or at least a confused reconsideration, looked at Ilara with new eyes. She was no longer just the isolated, morally ambiguous woman, but something else, something touched by the extraordinary. Her life, irrevocably altered by that single act, now seemed to stretch before her with a different horizon. The vastness of the plains, once a symbol of her solitude and struggle, now held a new, fragile promise, a hope born from an act of empathy that had transcended boundaries. She picked up a finely crafted bead, turning it over in her palm, feeling its smooth, cool weight. It was a tangible link to the boy, to the chief, to a moment when humanity had briefly eclipsed hatred. Her past, with its bitter choices and lingering regrets, still clung to her like a persistent shadow. But now, a flicker of light pierced through. The encounter had not erased her flaws, nor had it absolved her of her history, but it had shown her a possibility she had long since abandoned, that even in the darkest corners of the world, an unexpected act of compassion could sow the seeds of a future where understanding, however fragile, might yet bloom. The resolution was not a grand triumph, but a quiet, deeply personal shift, a dawning realization that perhaps, just perhaps, the world was not entirely defined by its harshness. She had chosen to extend her hand, and in return had been offered a reflection of her own potential for connection, a fragile thread woven into the vast tapestry of the frontier.